Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we're an integral part, and with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors who have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete a 5-day program convened by the Pachamama Alliance. That is one of my favorite organizations that has dedicated itself since it was founded in the mid-1990s to preserving the rainforest in South America, and more broadly, bringing to global attention the spirituality of the indigenous peoples there that has the role of quickening our awareness of how out of touch we are in so many ways in terms of our connection with nature. So what the Pachamama Alliance has been doing for many decades now is seeking to awaken the dreamer to a new dream. And it's been one of the most inspiring weeks we've had on Humanity Rising. It culminated yesterday after discussing the sacred headwaters of the Amazon Alliance, the history and origins of Pachamama with Bill and Lynn Twist and John Perkins and various people, including indigenous people there in the Amazon, around what it takes to do this work. So we had a wonderful session yesterday on the committed life and the deep intention that seizes us from the mother and motivates us to a pathway of transformation such that the more we work collaboratively to save the world, we actually save ourselves. And that is the essence of, I think, the great moment in which we all find ourselves. A moment in which human beings have so degraded and so desacralized the planetary ecology that now the great mother, Pachamama, is beginning to strike back, and the ecology is now spinning out of control, and we find ourselves literally on the precipice of self-destruction. So the message that Pachamama has been carrying, originating in that small Achuar tribe in Ecuador, being heard by Lynn and Bill and John and others in the North who responded to that call through a deep listening of the message, is now spawning a meme that has been taken worldwide. So we're going to conclude our 5-day program today by listening to two people who have been deeply immersed in Pachamama, and we'll conclude our program. But before we do, let us just take a moment, as we always do here on Humanity Rising, to just center ourselves and be in our hearts, and for the next few minutes to breathe together to the sound of some bells that Georg will put up momentarily. And when you hear the first bell, just start to inhale very slowly. Then you'll hear another bell and exhale very slowly. That's about 5 seconds, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. And today, as we breathe together, everyone, let us just remember the jungle. And let us breathe with the jungle, with the Amazon, the heart of the earth, the lungs of the earth, knowing that what we breathe in, the oxygen we breathe in, is what is breathed out by the trees and the plants. And what we breathe out is breathed in by them. And that's one reason why I have the trees behind me. As they breathe, we breathe. And that is just one little fractal of how integral humanity is with the larger whole. So let us breathe together for 15 breaths, and then we'll commence our program. Georg? Thank you, everyone. Breathing with the trees, breathing with the jungle, in the spirit of what Plotinus said several thousand years ago, that the whole universe breathes as one. In that spirit, I would like to introduce two of the senior staff at Pachamama Alliance, Maisa Arias and Mario Chigueras. Maisa is the global community manager for Pachamama. She's an activist, she's a dancer, she's a mother. She travels the world to spread the message of Pachamama and to quicken the dreamer to a new dream. Mario is also an activist. He's a father of two children. He is involved in strategic development of Pachamama, and they will be sharing their visions and dialoguing with one another, and then I'll come back in due course and we'll dialogue more deeply, which will conclude our 5-day program on this extraordinary organization that is changing the world. So Mario and Maisa, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim, for the opportunity. Hello to all of you, wherever you were dialing in from. And Jim, I just really thank you for that opening, in particular, calling on the Amazon. As Jim spoke about, our work in the Amazon is a real foundation for our work, and it doesn't show up as us protecting this thing, right? As powerful and as important as the rainforest is for the planet, it really comes from finding our family. I often describe going to the rainforest as finding my third parent. So you evoking the rainforest just felt really appropriate and wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm happy to see everybody, or at least virtually sense you, to feel you out there. And I'm very happy to be here with you, Maisa. And we are going to talk today a little bit about Pachamama Alliance and the work that we do, and a little bit of what's sort of underneath those programs. There's a sense, at least in this community, of a capacity to get at beyond the strategy of programs, what is actually happening. And so we started looking and asking, how do we talk about the liberation that we want to generate out in the world and the liberation that's needed internally? What does that mean? What does it look like? And Maisa is just really wonderful at speaking at this. And I'm honored to be here with you, Maisa, and with all of you. And I wonder if maybe we talk a little bit more of why we're here and what we have to offer this conversation, and maybe a little bit of what we do as well. Are you up for that, Maisa? Okay.
For sure.
All right. So I'll start. As Jim talked about, I do a bit of strategy development and program design at Pachamama Alliance. And I've been with the organization for about 8 years, almost 9. And I got introduced to it in a really powerful way of the sort of a cosmological story of humanity's place, not just today, but in the cosmos, in the web of life. And it was very intriguing. As a Latino man who grew up in the barrios of East LA, it was like an intuitive feeling, but it wasn't like I didn't quite know how it would manifest and work. And I got introduced to the work in a really helpful kind of prompt, 2 questions that guided one of our programs called the Game Changer Intensive. It's an 8-week online course. And the 2 questions that guide that course are, who do we need to be at this moment in history? And what do we need to do? And it really spoke to these 2 parts of me, of who do I need to be to thrive, to survive, to heal? And how do I meet this moment that is calling on me, is calling on my brothers and my sisters and my community to act? How do we marry those 2? So I often think of Pachamama Alliance's programmatic work as really being focused on who do we need to be and what do we need to do. I'll just say a tad bit more, and then I want to hear lots from you, Maisa. So much of this, I had done lots of youth development work, youth advocacy and activism. I had a little stint in tech that was really fun. But fundamentally, so much of my work was about empowering people, but empowering people from this context of growing up in a culture, in a system, in a society that kept us away from each other and kept us away from something profound in ourselves. But in my activism work, it was all about systems and action and working against, and there's tons to work against. There's a lot of harm to stop, right? And to resist. But on the weekends and at night, me and so many of my peers were like going to therapy and doing yoga retreats and meditation retreats. We were working on ourselves, but it never quite made it to the work. So I have had to invest lots in that personal work, and we'll probably get into that later. And working at Pachamama Alliance was my first time actually being able to integrate that personal transformation journey with the social, cultural, and economic transformation that I had dedicated my life to. And I think that's what a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And Maisa, I would love to hear what brings you here. What is the story that makes you particularly interested and ready to share this particular conversation?
Thank you, Mario, and thank you everyone who's here listening, and thank you for your presence. As I hear you speak, Mario, I'm reminded of part of why I'm here and with you and in this space and with all of you. It's being in Mario's presence often translates as being in a space of respect, of honoring. When in that space, there's such an opening, and this is what we're here to talk about. And in that opening, for me, it's a sense of who I am, who I can be, tapping into my own freedom and who I can be. And I say that because you all might have gotten that from Mario's presence, but also for me, not only to talk beautifully about you, Mario, but the possibility of how we can hold people, how we can hold the human fellows, and everyone we work with, everyone we interact with, regardless of where they stand. And part of what I've done, part of my work with Pachamama Alliance, I've been with Pachamama Alliance for 10 years, is holding spaces, is holding people, is being with people, and is being in collective and in movement. And I've done this, yes, in the US, but in many countries. I mean, I've gone, in trips taking the Pachamama Alliance work, a 5-stop trip from Brazil to China, and multiple stops in between. And as you speak, and as Jim was telling us earlier, how this all started with COVID, I was thinking, wow, right, this is how it all started, in person, in gathering, in community, in collective. And it's been such a beautiful ritual to visit people, to create the world that they each see is possible where they are. And that's what keeps me here. That's what's kept me here. And that's what, part of what really brings me alive, knowing that there are these groups of people in whose presence one can experience what it is to be human, honored and respected and creative and playful together. So that's part of what I do with Pachamama Alliance. And of course, everything that we do, is sourced, is inspired, or at the least, we aim to stay connected to the roots of this work, as Jim and Mari have talked about, in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador. And now the work is expanded to Peru as well. But we're always striving to bring forth that sense of profound interdependence and interconnection that one feels in the rainforest, but not everyone has been there. And so how to bring in that sense wherever I go with my work now online, but how to bring it in is part of the question that I'm always in. And why we're here too, right? How there's no possible way for me to speak about liberation and freedom and healing unless we really truly tap into what it means to be interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. Every other conversation, I do believe, stems from that. And we'll go deeper into that in a moment.
I love that. And I feel like that is such a fundamental piece of what personal transformation, I think, means for us, right? That there's some way where um, so often we're trained to our personal transformation is just an individual thing. It's just to feel more capacity to fulfill our dreams, just to feel anything. And I love that you're highlighting this is a collective effort. I wonder if you'd be up for speaking a little bit more of like what do you mean? We had talked about individual transformation and the liberation we're trying to create out in the world. But for you, and when you're talking to participants or how it feels just in your own body, what is it that you mean when you're talking about individual transformation?
Mm. Yeah, and I love that that you highlight what it is for me. It's so fun to go around the world and be in this conversation with people all over the world, and everyone has their own experience of what that is. So I have to say I've kind of given up trying to give it a one definition. Because it's in the multiple views, perspectives, and experiences that I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is for you. For me, it's profound in the sense that when I have noticed the shift in my life, to me that is when transformation has happened, and the shift can come from so many different places. But I will say, I believe all of us are born with a like knowing that we are part of a web, and we are conditioned in a way to forget that, right? But there are times when I can tap into what I think was what I was born with, and those moments where like it's all in my body. I'm like, I remember this. That this has happened to me. And some examples of what that is I do remember when I watch and experience the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, which was one of my first experiences with Pachamama Alliance. I really had this moment of, wait, I remember this feeling. I remember this experience. It comes from way, like long ago. And it was an experience of I do believe it was an experience of interconnectedness. I do believe it was an experience of interdependence. And that's in the realm of the feeling, of the remembering. But there is a way in which after that, like there's, or honestly throughout my life, there's been moments when I've shifted. I've shifted. I've noticed that I have a different place, that there is a different role for me to play, and that who I am uniquely in this world has a possibility at this very moment that is not the same thing that it was yesterday or a year ago. See, so I can try to give you very specific definitions of transformation, and I'm staying away from it because it's for me so much an experience that is so different at each time in our lives that I try not to encapsulate into anything. But I love it when I hear people telling me the stories of their own transformation, of how it happened for them, of how they see the world now, but it's particularly that piece, how I see the world now and how I see myself in the world now. That is different than before, that got me transforming, that this is how I feel transformed. But how about you, Mario? I've always enjoyed hearing you talk about what that is for you.
Well, I really resonate with this sense of like memory, and I hear you, it's not like intellectual memory, it's almost like cellular memory or spiritual or psychic memory, something that's like, that clicks, that feels true. I love that unnameable, unspeakable, almost unplaceable thing that is occasionally tapped into. You also mentioned the conditioning that sort of steers us away from that. Yeah, you know, like, I think that for me, it's a matter of, I think I have had the privilege of having different instances of my life, of moments of access to that truth of interconnection, enough of them to understand or to see an incongruence and something not working in the world. So I remember, so my family was, you know, we were poor, grew up in LA and whatnot, Latino family. My dad was from El Salvador, my immigrant family, and challenges and whatnot. But as I looked out and I sort of like, the challenges in our family weren't my dad's personality, weren't just my mom's personality. We hit hard times and we were homeless. And when we were homeless, it wasn't just like, oh, there's another family who couldn't keep it together. There's another mother who couldn't pay her bills. Eventually, over and over again, when we were at our lowest point, we were surrounded by women of color, single women of color, single mothers. Over and over again, when we were struggling, it was a particular profile of person who was appear to us. And I don't think I knew it then, but I started to feel like, oh, this isn't about like, how could my parents not keep paying rent? This is something bigger. This was something that was organizing me and my family, my neighborhood. And so those flashes of insight, of being connected with this perpetual sense of feeling that empowerment isn't always enough. Over and over again, people are trapped by the conditions that they're raised in, by the conditioning that they're raised in. So I think for me, and eventually we moved from LA to San Francisco, and it was like, it was a traumatizing experience, but it was also a profoundly liberating experience. You know, in LA, there weren't people talking about our inherent interdependence and interconnection. Here there were, and I may have thought of them as weirdos back then, but it was happening. There was a conversation happening up in Northern California that wasn't happening in Southern California. And so for me, what my personal journey and what I feel good at helping people with is traveling through the conditioning that we have all been raised in, the cultural story that we've been raised in that has us separate from each other, that has us prioritize profits over people, that has us relate to the world as there are resources to be had, has us relate to our lifestyle as, you know, we discard things when we're done with them. There's an away somewhere and we throw it away and our garbage goes away and our recycling goes away and the people who clean our home go away and the people who work in restaurants go away. There's an away that we don't think about. So traveling through the conditioning that emerges over and over again, and that I'll just say shows up as, like, I think I've been pulled over maybe 50, 60 times in my life, and I have never gotten a ticket. It's always, where are you going? What are you doing? Are you on drugs? And I'm pretty clean cut now, but I used to not be as clean cut. And part of being clean cut is so that I present in a non-threatening way. And so this way of getting pulled over by police, on one hand, it's unfair and I'm very clear I didn't do anything wrong. And on the other, there's a message that there's something wrong with me. There's something untrustworthy in me, that I don't belong. And that fundamental not belonging, not being trustworthy, as I've had to absolutely confront to come close to my truth, which is that I do belong. I belong here. I belong with you. I belong with all of you. But the pathway there wasn't just sort of feeling it, it was traveling through my conditioning and understanding, oh, we're talking about racism. Oh, we're talking about class. We're talking about access to wealth. And we're talking about patriarchy, right? Like those structures helped me understand what gets in the way of that truth, and what gets in the way of our capacity to tap into it. So for me, it's a constant thing of traveling through the conditioning that we've got and transforming that conditioning. And again, it's so not, I feel the truth, therefore I am the truth. For me, it hasn't worked out like that. Again, like I can feel my truth. I am part of everything. And by the fifth time of getting pulled over and asked the same questions, it actually took me years to realize this wasn't everybody's experience. I thought it was everybody's experience, that cops just ask you things. Cops stop you on your way home. It's certainly part of growing up. And it didn't change when I became an adult. So those messages impact how we see ourselves. It certainly impacted how I see myself. And again, identifying as a first generation Latino man, but I will also say what I've seen in my focusing on conditioning. I'm also a man with privilege in a context where we privilege men. So as a man of color, I can see I've got to sort of unleash myself from notions that I'm subservient or I don't belong. As a man, I can feel how much masculinity and patriarchy has put me in a box, has put the men around me in a box. And there's deep liberation in healing from that place of privilege. So I hold this notion of personal transformation and the conditioning that we all have, whether you benefit from this system, whether you are on the edge of privilege, which in one way or another we all are, or whether you're exploited or your value is extracted from this system, there is liberation to be had. There's healing to be had on either end of that spectrum. And for me, that is what kind of traveling through that conditioning is what helps me access that truth that you spoke about.
Thank you. Yes. And see, we started with a question of transformation, and I'm reminded all the levels and layers in which the word and that experience happens, right? Like I'm in the journey that you're talking about, the journey in general, which includes the conditioning. You were speaking, I went back to the rainforest in this moment of like, I really had this, I am so tiny. I am a particle like next to this one giant, beautiful tree. And because of what the people in the community there, the guides were telling us, I also had this sense of, and then you're really big. Your presence is really big. You are going back to San Francisco. You know, I'm Peruvian, and I'll speak to that piece later. And you're going back to San Francisco. You have access to lots of people. There's a message that has to be passed along. People need to hear what's happening here. So there was this sense. There was that's one of the moments of shift for me, of being small and being big at the same time, right? And it's such a constant, like wherever I go, it's such a constant. And but when I go back to that moment, it's important. Like I'm reminded, yes, like that's my source. I am big and I am small. But see, it's when I get to choose how I see myself, who I am. Am I playing big? Am I playing small? Am I being big? Am I being small? But it's my agency. Like I decide when that is. And that's definitely informed my life since that moment. It's been about 8 years since that happened to me. Yeah, but at different stages, as I was saying, of my life, I've had the shift. So there's more of a spiritual, if you will, experience of that. and there's also for me, the on the ground, this is happening here. Also, as an immigrant, a woman of color here, I've had to, at moments, forget who I am to make it here. There's a lot of adaptation, and then the risks of assimilation and adaptation are, it's a thin line when one has to balance so many things in life, and that was my experience. And so I've come to a different part of my life when I've been able, another shift, and I've been able to look back and say, wait a second, but that me over there, I still like that me, like that me that's like hardcore organizer in Peru. I'm like, where is she? Oh, so it's this like unlearning and relearning. Like it's that constant going back and moving forward, another step and another step. But for me, in that dance, in that practice, is also my finding my own liberation. And see, I don't do it. I don't intend to do it for myself. Like this happens because for me, it's in the gathering, in the community, in the collective, that I get to be reminded of that other person that I also am, right? And bring that back to me. And as I do that, I know that for so many other people, they get to see it and also practice how, like, there's that part of me, right? And let's bring that part of me here too, for whatever trauma, for whatever happened to me that I had to leave a part of me behind, like bring it back and become and integrate it so that we become more whole. For me, that's part of the healing experience that I am having. That's part for me of what liberation is, finding ourselves, who we truly are in place, so that from that place we can contribute to what Pachamama Alliance is doing. We're talking about what some indigenous peoples in Ecuador have told us, and that we know from other places too. My liberation is found with yours, right? And so, and I really like, the older I grow, the more I live from that place. It's easy words to say, but to truly live from that place, to really knowing that your liberation is bound with mine, that we are in this cycle together, that our liberation is what can generate liberation, freedom, and healing beyond you and me. That, I mean, there's so much. I get goosebumps, and I'm gonna stop talking because I would keep going and going, and I'm like, that's where it is. Like, this is what brings me life. Let's go do it. Let's do this for each other. Anyways.
I don't think I'm going to let you stop talking because it's helpful. And I just want to like really drive this point home that I think is why I think we're a match for working at the Pachamama Alliance. That so much meaning and context can be gleaned in relationship is so core. It's such a fundamental key to what personal transformation means. And in so many ways, it isn't personal. It's interpersonal. It's in relation. I remember being at this climate justice conference, and I was in a breakout group, and there was this indigenous leader, a native man, a chief in the United States, and they were all different activists, and we were all talking, and my turn came, and I felt pretty on it. Felt like my words were really good, and we gotta understand we're not separate from nature, and we gotta really work to support nature. And I was just going on, and I could see him in Zoom, and he did not look impressed. He did not look at all impressed or moved. And it got to him, and he was so irritated at how much our context is individual. He's like, all of this me and I and we, you don't understand that you are part of nature. You are nature. There is no protecting nature. There is no advocating for nature as if you have the power to speak for your arm. You are nature. And it wasn't with love. It was with like, and you're the advocates, you're the people leading this movement, you're the folks doing it. And it was such a powerful, like, I'm constantly having to learn and relearn this, that in relationship is where there is meaning, in belonging is where there is power. And so much of healing, again, yes, I think it'll help me sleep better at night. I might live a little longer, but it also makes me a better father, makes me a better friend, a better lover, a better neighbor. And that's what actually generates more life. That's where I feel like that's where that frequency that the Amazon sort of vibrates at touches me. And I feel like, okay, this is right. This is, yes, I feel better. And that's wonderful, but it makes me more present to the life that's around me and to support that life, to not get in its way, to not block it, to not enclose it, to not be afraid of how complex and contradictory life can be, or how complex and contradictory relationships can be, love can be, children can be, work can be. All of that healing gives more capacity to be with what is, and what is amazing, is rich and vibrant, and yeah.
I just my before you move on, I am reminded. So yesterday I was doing a workshop with an organization called Indigenous and Modern, and one of the elders leading the workshop there on that side, Concanco. He is, he calls himself an elder, indigenous elder. He's from Cameroon, in exile in Portugal, and was speaking about climate justice. And in speaking about climate justice, I just loved it. He's like, yeah, and we talk about the rights of nature, but I just want to remind us that like, we don't gotta give back anything to nature. And I love it because, like, yesterday and in this forum, Atosa was speaking, and as always, Atosa for Pachamama Alliance and Amazon Watch and the Sacred Headwaters Initiative, they don't speak like that, right? It's not just like, I'm gonna give you your rights back. Like, it's a much bigger place of really acknowledging, like, it's not just I am going to protect you. Like, it's so much larger than that, as you said, Mario. And I love that reminder yesterday from Concanco, saying there's nothing to give back to nature. Just sit with that. I'm like, yes. So you brought it back. That's my remembering from yesterday.
You had mentioned part of your journey as an immigrant, as a woman of color, and how that informs your work on liberation and your work with people. I'd love to hear more of what you mean and what you're speaking about.
Yes. Yeah, it's almost like it's just the work that has to be done. I believe personally, that's for all of us. Like, there's work to be done to understand what healing and liberation, freedom means to each one of us. In my case, I came to the U.S. When I was 21, and so yeah, most of my life had been spent in Peru, and then I come here, and there's survival mode. One has to land somewhere and make it, right? You just have to make it. That's sort of the context. There's different ways that one can hold it, but for me, I just had to make it. and in that, as I was saying, I I lost myself a little. I lost myself a little, but I found beautiful paths. I started, or I continued rather, my path in working with children. And working with children is a magnificent access and gift to understanding and to understanding what it is to open up the gate and open up and give these children the path to themselves, right? Because they go to school, they have a structure, and it's very beautiful and all, and there's this it's always at the edge of restraining them a little bit. There's I've always noticed that, and so I was the teacher and the guide that would open up things a little bit, so that they would, not so that they would run away, but so that they would have a little bit of freedom to explore who they are and who they were. And so I was doing this very intentionally, and really making sure that they understood that not from words, but that they lived from a place of, there's of interdependence, I will say, that what they did to another, they did to themselves. But in a very, it's for children, in a very careful, gentle way. And I was doing this for some years until I had one of these moments of, wait a second, I'm also that other person who wants to be connected to Peru, to Ecuador, to the rainforest, to the trees. And so in remembering that, I came into Pachamama Alliance, and that happened. But in all of this, I'm still developing and growing in a place that wasn't the place where I grew up. And so it truly is, it's a whole new world. It's like, it's like being born again, but in a new place. Just take it as I said it. I'm like, oh wow, okay, I have to learn everything again. And so in learning everything again is the risk of forgetting who I was. That's what happened. There was the risk of forgetting where I came from. And the constant struggle has been to stay connected to my roots, to my ancestors, to my land, to what really brings me alive. But again, there's all of that personal piece, and there's the part of, oh yes, and by the way, I also, it's not easy to make it with who I am, with how I look like, with how I sound, because I made a choice not to take classes that were going to get rid of my accent. And so that means I'm immediately, people know that I'm not from here. And sometimes that doesn't work very well for people, or for me, for jobs and whatnot. And yeah, and so I've had to sort of learn to make it and do this for myself. And the point hasn't just been to empower myself to be someone. The point for me has been to stay connected to the roots that I remember. I'm like, oh, I am that person. I come from my ancestors. I come from that place. I am this tiny particle in this amazing, gigantic universe. And I have something to give. And I there is something for me to give, to do. It starts, sure, with understanding what my freedom, my healing is, and it moved me forward from that place. And I've been on the journey of my own healing, but not just for myself, and not just to empower myself, but to really see there is a power, there is, and I have the ability to change my circumstances and to tap into or to support others, to tap into their own ability to change their circumstances and that of others. See, so my journey has been not only to empower myself, although that's very, very important, because we gotta feel good to do the work, right? Like, that's also true. But it doesn't stop there. It has always been about my ability to change my circumstances and that of others. That's what keeps me in the motion and with the wheels turning on healing and on feeling and experiencing what liberation is.
Hmm. I so value that, speaking to the distinction between empowerment and power, feeling power and actually being able to change your circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that you said that at once gives me tons of compassion for you and has me reflect on what happens in the industrialized world in the United States. When you talked earlier about the line between adapting and assimilating, you said like there's a risk in assimilating, as if that's, some would say, isn't that good? Isn't that the whole point? And then you also spoke to remembering who you are, remembering the land, remembering the ancestors. And I feel like this is something about the immigrant experience that is so helpful to watch, because in so many ways, what's asked of us, and I say us, and I include folks on this call, and I'm including white people and people ostensibly from the United States. At some point or other, there was a choice to assimilate or not. And there's this, what are you assimilating into and what do you let go? So you're in this moment of remembering your land, remembering your ancestors, remembering place. And those are not just words. That is what had humanity survive for tens of thousands of years: land, place, ancestors, relationship to land. That is where wisdom came from. That is where knowledge came from. So, when you say like, remember it's not just food, though I'm sure you can throw down on, on that. It's not just aunts and uncles, though that too. It's this lineage and this anchor that I think makes us human, that we end up spending a good amount of time in our work exploring. One of the features of doing this kind of work that integrates, it's basically activism with personal transformation, is that enough generations here in the United States or in an industrialized world, or in an extractive economy or extractive culture, you forget your ancestors, you forget your land. That's the price of admission in so many ways, that I am here and I move, to go to school, and then I move to get a job, and then I move to get married. And your sense of place gets sold out. So I'm just sort of feeling this, like when you talk about the risk of assimilating, I sense that risk is so deep. The risk of assimilation, the cost of assimilation, is losing your sense of place, is forgetting your ancestors, forgetting the land that your people came from. I'm first generation, and I have a word of a place where my family came from, Sonsonate in El Salvador. But between my relationship to that land, where generations of my family came from, there's a lot that has been lost. And I don't know if I'm intentional. I will remind my children of what that is. But again, their children hopefully will have a sense of place of where we raise them. And that's a luxury not many people actually end up being able to have, remembering their lineage of place and people, and the cost of assimilation.
So thank you for bringing it into that beautiful nugget of wisdom. I do want to ask you, Mario. Well, I guess I now have two questions. One of them is perhaps this one. What are your practices? What are your practices? Perhaps it has to do with assimilation. Perhaps it is like how do you stay alert, right? Like when you're doing one versus the other. if this is true for you, the adaptation versus assimilation still, but also what are your practices to stay grounded in that interdependence, in that interconnectedness?
I so love that you ask it like that. One of my teachers and mentors says, you're always practicing something, and what do you want to be practicing? Practice is totally the bedrock of where my transformation is embodied. Like, for me, it doesn't show up as I want to be interconnected, and I will be interconnected. It takes action. It takes practice. So I'll be very practical. Meditation helps. I meditate. I also do somatic practices from a lineage from generative somatics, which came out of Strozzi Institute. And that practice, a fundamental principle of it is that there is hundreds of thousands of years of ancestral wisdom in my body, that tons of what my mind can't process is being processed by my body without me knowing it. And the more that I can be in touch with it, the more I can is actually being present, right? So I can actually be here. So I use somatic practice left and all the time. I've used it here with you. I'm feeling my back right now to not just sort of be focused on everything out there, but to feel myself planted and having a sense of place. And the other thing that I'll say that you mentioned, I don't know if this is what you meant, but I love relationships on the margins of things. So, when you can't assimilate so much, and as a woman of color with an accent, there will be limits to how, like you spoke to this, of how much you will be allowed to assimilate. Or when I'm driving in a wealthy neighborhood and I might feel like, hey, I like it here. It's pretty, it's comfortable, some good food, and I get pulled over or followed or whatnot, that like how much we're even allowed to assimilate. I really trust those who live on the margins. Who is our society not paying attention to? Because in so many ways, that is the place where I feel like I get the most insight and feedback of how this system can transform. So my community is full of misfits, queer people, activists, low-income people, artists. And it isn't just because I feel like, oh, you're interesting people, but there's a way where there has been either a conscious resistance to assimilation or a forced inability for assimilation. And for me, there is that practice of having community on the margins gives me more access to what can be. Sometimes it's truth. At the very least, it's what can be a radical redefinition of what mainstream America, in my case, looks like. So between meditation and mindfulness, somatic practice to feel how my body is processing, and being in relationship with people on the margins of our society, I feel like those are the things that keep me awake and keep me present.
And yes. And I love how in it is the relational piece, that being in connection, in relationship. I mean, from before you were saying connected to ancestors, to the land, and now and to the people. And the people, not only my neighbors, which it usually translates into that. It's not only my neighbors. I'm going past that, like, and not just because it's interesting. This is what feeds us, and this is where, I mean, for me, it's in many ways, it's to have the makeup of the community, to be connected with the full makeup of my community. I mean, here in San Francisco, of course, it looks different in Peru, but this piece about being in relationship, this is so much of what we are speaking about at Pachamama Alliance. I mean, we always have. And right now, with a specific focus on during this climate crisis, we're talking about climate justice because we have to talk about our relations. We can't just talk about climate, right? And in relating and in relations, there's justice and there's injustice. And so now that we're talking about that path, when I hear you speak, I'm like, yes, and it comes down to our everyday life, being in relationship. And as we say in our trainings, I mean, be out there, be in action, but be in relationship. Like the first thing at the bottom, at the core of everything, please be in relationship with the land, with the people, with yourself. It's that the trilogy will take us somewhere. It's not just one part of it, right? And I'm like, when I say that and knowing that this is the work I do, I'm like, yes, that's the fundamental work. That is the part of the work that connects us, or that's in that message is the connection to the source of this work in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador. It's all of our relations, and that is our connection to spirit, to our connection to earth, our connection to Pachamama Alliance. So I love how our conversation is just like it comes full circle for me.
I want to invite Jim on soon, but I also want to give people a little bit of a sense of, I feel like we do really practical work. I wonder if we want to give people a sense of, like, you are on kind of the cutting edge of so much of our work at Pachamama Alliance, and it can sound like we just sort of hang out in the ether and with these big concepts and principles. How is this manifesting as work at Pachamama Alliance? How is this showing up as like offerings to people, where it's being translated from these principles and these sort of they're not abstractions, but they're orientations to the world into actual programs? How would you frame frame what's happening?
Yeah, I think I would go back like to all of the offerings to give a sense, because I feel like our conversation is a little bit of the journey that one can go through with Pachamama Alliance, where one can begin, let's say, with Awakening the Dreamer, which is a 2-hour, right now, a self-paced, and in some places starting again to be an in-person experience, more of a 4-hour experience, but that is it's Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream, and you can find it online. And it's really looking at the current crisis and seeing what's my place in here in this crisis, what's for me to do. You likely have an experience of transformation to what's happening in the world right now. With that, we look at environmental sustainability, social justice, and spiritual fulfillment. And after that, people are invited to go into a longer offering, the Game Changer Intensive. And this is online, 8 weeks online. And Maree mentioned this at the beginning. It's a program where people explore who do I need to be and what do I need to do, in 8 fantastic modules that take you from topics about evolutionary activism. You'll be looking at the climate crisis too, but not from not in a disconnected way. So this is the 8-week program online, and then people are invited to get in action after being in the exploration, after looking at myself in this world. Then it's like, okay, what to do with this? And so we're inviting people to what we call the Introduction to Community Climate Action Training, which is the foundations for being in action in your local community, right? So we explore, what do I need to do and who do I need to be? And I was like, all right, let's put it in action. But how do we put it in action? Go out and create relationships. Like, what's happening in your community? Who is in your community? what can you do with the people that are around you, the organizations, the individuals? What are they doing for justice? What are they doing for climate justice? And then go join them. And we give people the tools to engage with people in their communities, the ability to create plans and establish connections. And we're developing this more and further. So there's follow-on workshops and programs to that as well. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I thank you. That's and in so many ways, we've got Awakening the Dreamer, this sort of introduction to the Pachamama Alliance ecosystem, the Game Changer Intensive that kind of takes those fundamental things and dives deeper, and then the introduction to community climate action training. All of those things integrate some of the big principles that we've been speaking about with real world, what the intersecting crises that we're all facing, racism, democracy, climate justice. So the work, the challenge, the call is to integrate these profound notions of interdependence, of interconnection, of exploring the myth of separation in tangible, practical ways so that people can actually take community action to address the issues facing their communities. So there's real work there, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. And Dennis on the chat has been sharing our website and our mission. So thank you, Dennis, for doing a great job with that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples because I am excited. Like in running the program, I see people, I mean, people get it, right? Like I'm not just gonna go and do something. It's more like, who am I gonna do it with? And what are the values to keep in mind as I'm doing whatever I'm doing? So, and watching for any unintended consequences. Like that's key to all of this. Just yesterday, we learned that a participant of the Introduction to Community Climate Action 2 cohorts ago finally got all the permits for an unused land to become a community garden. And I mean, just that, somebody decides, this is not used, this can bring food to people in the community, let's use it. It takes so much to make it work, to make it happen, but they did it, right? We have people in Liberia creating a radio and a resource center for people in the community to learn about the risks of the climate crisis and what they can do to educate themselves there. There's people in Kenya creating a whole other tree planting project. There really is, or people declaring climate emergency in Japan and other towns, in their towns. It's a wide area of projects, and this is what people are doing once they find who they are, what they can do, and who they can do this with, and it happens. They make it happen.
Very cool. Thank you for presencing some of the participants. Feel like you might want to invite Jim back to see what else you might want to share or ask. Jim, thank you so much for the space to speak some.
Well, thank you. This has been a sublime dialogue between the two of you, quite extraordinary, actually, I must say. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you both for the clarity with which you've articulated, among other things, which I'd like to get to, but fundamentally, in the first instance, this relationship between race and spirituality, and between colonial oppression, exclusion, enticement to join by forgetting who you are, and how one in the midst of that particular coercive context still has the capacity to wake up. And so I just want to say that I think this has been one of the most nuanced conversations we've ever had on Humanity Rising about this very almost intractable issue. And you've teased out so many important aspects of it. And I'd like to just, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to explore it more deeply in the following way. Knowing that what you're saying is so true, that you come into the United States, for example, as people of color. On the one hand, you're told you need to assimilate, but the racist structures and attitudes projected onto you make that assimilation almost impossible. And it's even worse if you're a Black male.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you have to live your lives within those constraints and try to make a difference. And as you were pointing out, Maisa, you're caught in a conundrum between adapting and assimilating. And as you pointed out, Mario, the danger of the assimilation is to forget the roots, which make you who you are.
Yeah.
And so I just want to, and what is striking me is the relationship between that kind of situational framework and the spirituality that emerges around honoring the mavericks and the heretics and those that are on the margins, because you're both on the margins, and all of us. I was born and raised in China and Taiwan, and I was a minority till I was 16 years old, actually, in an Asian Oriental culture. And but my parents were missionaries, and they were trying to convert them. And from a very early age, I thought, this is delusional. We shouldn't be trying to convert these people. We should be learning from these people. My God, they have a civilization that goes back 5,000 years, man. And so just speak, both of you, to how your particular biographies have really shaped your spirituality, because I think it's made them much more distinctive than being born white in a white culture, going to church and never having the experience of even understanding that there's even a box that you're in, let alone that there's a challenge to develop an individuated pathway to spirituality. So I'd just like to hear your comments on those issues.
Yeah. Thank you for getting it. Thank you for I feel like you really got it. And can I just say something quickly?
Sure, please.
As you're talking, I realize, the inherent contradiction of race, which we know is not real, right? We know is an illusion, and the reality that we are raised in it. And I feel like spiritual people uniquely can hold that contradiction, or I sort of call on spiritual people to hold that contradiction, that both are true. My race is a total illusion. It is not true. It is not mine. I didn't ask to be a person of color. I'm not actually, this is a social construct that has no scientific reality.
Exactly.
Yet it is, in as much as language generates reality, and the cultural stories that we have make things real. I am a person of color. And so I feel like I just want to acknowledge what a contradiction it is. And that's part of the biography that you're talking about, is developing a capacity to hold contradiction. That I am at once everything and I am separate. I love your thing, Maisa, of I am I am insignificant and I forgot exactly how you said the significance and the insignificance that we hold at the same time. So in this group and with you, Jim, I just really want to acknowledge the contradiction of race, of gender, of any social construct that actually isn't true, yet forms our vision of the world, and maybe even separates us from something so profound. So Irish people weren't always white, Jewish people weren't always white. at different points, there was an offer an invitation to become white. And the cost is huge. The cost is huge. And so I feel like one of the things that has impacted and given me capacity in this is just holding contradiction, holding that I belong, even in the ways that my options might be limited. Certainly my single mother's options were limited, despite her sense. I mean, she was who fed me my spiritual grounding in the world. No matter how interdependent and interconnected and friendly she felt like the universe didn't always treat her like that. But it isn't the universe, it's our culture. And being able to sort of discern the culture that can embody separation, malevolence, cruelty is very different than the spirit of life, which, again, when you brought up the Amazon in the beginning, it is an unmistakable source of love, of belonging. And that tension, I feel like, has been part of both my political training and my evolution spiritually, is holding all of those tensions and holding contradiction.
You know, that's so profound, Mario, and it calls to mind Carl Jung's great notion that the deepest learning and the deepest awareness of truth comes from what he calls the antinomial nature of reality. That we're always caught and live out our lives within contradictions. And an antinomy, he said, is at least two, if not more, mutually exclusive, internally consistent truths that collide. And the great challenge of being authentically human is to be able to embrace both, integrate them within yourself in your own unique way. And that's what he called the pathway of individuation. So I just wanted to underscore the profundity of what you just said about this holding these kind of contradictions. And I had, by the way, just a quick example of that yesterday. I have a neighbor, and he has a beautiful fig tree, and I love figs. And he's offered figs, so I went over there and we were chatting, and as I was gathering a few figs in a little brown bag, and he said, you know, the most interesting thing happened. His wife had gotten them on ancestry.com. He's a Black man. By all, if you looked at him, you'd think this is a Black American male. And he said, you know what the extraordinary irony is? When we did our ancestry.com, I am Black by my color, but much of my ancestry comes from Italy, Sweden, France, England. So I feel universal. I don't feel Black. I feel human. But when people interact with me, they interact with me as if I'm a Black man.
Yes.
And it just made me realize the absurdity of race. And so what you're saying, that it's both not true and true simultaneously. And that's the contradiction that we have to hold.
Positive.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. Maisa, what would you say?
Wow. I had an experience in some way similar to the one you had, Jim, growing up in Taiwan. But growing up in Peru, my sister is fair skin. It's like you wouldn't tell that she's Peruvian by the general standard, and I'm not so much. I have a brother who's even darker, much darker than me, and in my family we had the social construct contradiction and tension, because when we were growing up, we were already we could go to clubs and whatnot. Some of us weren't allowed to go in, and so the ones allowed to go, my sister could. The us and some of our friends, we, for whatever made up reason, we would not be allowed to go in. And so I had these
Even
experiences,
in Peru, even in Peru.
even in
Extraordinary,
Peru.
extraordinary.
And so I had this, what is happening here? Like from an early age, I mean, that happened when I was older, but from an early age, there was talk about how we looked and our skin color and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in the very personal and at times just internal, what is it? Like, why is this happening? Right? Like because at home, it wasn't. At home, we had mom and dad and they loved us, and there's no difference and all of that. As soon as you leave out the door, things are different and the constructs begin. And so I grew up in noticing the contradiction, a very politicized family, so very, very aware of what was happening outside the door. And then coming here, I experienced it. Right. I also experienced that I am different. I look different. And while in Peru, I had mom and dad, and I had our own way of staying connected in unit, in family, that kept us strong and grounded. In here, I didn't necessarily have that. So that having to stay connected to roots, the having to not forget where I come from, that is lineage, that is land, that is family, that is all of it, that is community. Like that was really, really important. And the way to access that for me is what I would call the spiritual practice. Is what that bring me back home. What brings me back home is my practice, and that's a way to hold the contradiction that we've been talking about. And it is really hard, which is why I think when Mario was saying practice, whatever that means to each one of us, is really, really important. And it's also, I mean, racism is real, right? Like I experience it in so many different ways. And there is a way in which part of the contradiction is to stay loving, is to still love people. And it's hard because there's so much hurt on a daily basis, that the staying connected to love and being loving and understanding. And I feel like in everything I've heard, in every talk I've heard you, Jim, you've used the word compassion, and I really appreciate that. And I'm connecting to that. It's like how staying connected to source, so that compassion can come, so that understanding, and so that more significant part of me, the bigger tree part of me, can like stand here with you, not with anyone here, but like with the person that might not be understanding how they're being oppressive or racist, right? So it takes a lot, but I think we all want to shine like the sun and be beautiful like the moon, and sometimes we really mess up on our attempts to be that. And so being forgiving, because ultimately I do think ultimately we do all want something good, just don't know exactly how to get it.
Shine like the sun and be as beautiful as the moon. What a beautiful image. I love that. I love that. Let me just raise one final issue. And I think it's inherent in what you've both been saying about the relationship. You know, you made a comment, Maisa, a bit ago, that the bottom line is relationship, staying in relationship. And I think what you're both exemplifying so powerfully is the relationship between the matrix of relationship and one's identity. Because one can get lost in the matrix of relationship if one does not know existentially who one actually is in terms of one's lineage, one's roots, one's culture, one's history, and one's practice. Because our practice is what makes us essentially who we are as we relate in the larger world. So I just want to note that the importance that both of you place on your daily practice, your spiritual practice, as a way to empower you to be more compassionately relational. And within that context, I loved what you both were saying, you first, Maisa, around the smaller we become in terms of the larger whole, the larger we become in terms of our capacity for impact. That there's an inherent relationship between the micro and the macro, but the micro never disappears. You know, sometimes it's the droplet dissolving into the ocean as we go into the rainforest, my God. And then sometimes it's the rainforest and the infinite condensing into our little drop. So both of you, just as we close, speak to us about the relationship between getting smaller and smaller and smaller in the face of the great mystery, and out of that becoming larger and larger and larger in terms of our impact.
I so appreciate your reflections back and how you come back to questions like this. Yeah, very grateful. Somebody, a group that I was practicing with in Cusco in Peru, made me aware of, often we hear we're one, and we fall into an interesting pattern with we're one. But they said, we're one and unique. And to me, that I'm like, yes, okay, if you bring that unique into it, I can go with the one. But because unfortunately the one deletes, erases too much, but the unique brings it back. And so I'm just in this moment, I thought of the large, the community, the global is the one. And there is this uniqueness, like millions, billions of unique little particles connecting to the one, to the big, to the global, to the movement, to our freedom, to our liberation. Like that's my response to that, one and unique.
Yeah, even the snowflakes, every single snowflake is completely unique. Every single human being is completely unique. So it's so profound what you both are bringing out of this antinomy, and the one and the many is the great complexio within which we live our lives and have our beings and develop our spirituality and learn to love one another. You're absolutely right. Mario, what would you say on this topic?
Well, first up, I just love the opportunity. I personally derive so much comfort from smallness, and from feeling that like everything around me is so much bigger. It's got me. I'm going to be okay because I'm small here. And there's such a tendency in our culture to elevate ourselves, to be, the savior, to have all of the answers. So personally, I take a lot of comfort feeling the smallness, feeling the fractals. And I also will just say this emerges in our work when people talk about like, well, I want to be part of the solution, but where do I start? So this like understanding the fractal nature of our lives, that as Adrienne Maree Brown says, the small is all, is a powerful way to feel belonging, but it's also a really powerful way to take action in the world. That, how do you stop the fossil fuel industry? Here, you start here. And from here, you find connections and relationships that have you make institutional impact, but it starts here with yourself, who you're in relationship with, and the things that you have control over. So it's just such a powerful concept, both spiritually for a sense of belonging and in terms of activism and action.
Thank you both. This has been, again, you two are sublime. Pachamama Alliance is very lucky to have the two of you, I must say, as someone who's observed human beings for many, many years. And so I want to thank you and acknowledge both your humility and your brilliance. And I would say to our global audience, as we contemplate the power of the Pachamama Alliance and the need simultaneously to protect the Amazon as a specific. What we've witnessed today is the kind of spirituality and awareness that enables us to do that. So it's two sides of the same coin, that there is an objective work to do in a specific place on planet Earth, which in and of itself is related to the rest of the planetary ecology. So working anywhere helps solve the challenges everywhere. But there's also a spiritual maturation and development that we need to engage in simultaneously.
Yes.
To ensure that not only the work that we're doing is as effective as it needs to be in a world where humanity is like teetering on the precipice of self-destruction, but it's also that spiritual awakening of the dream to a new dream that enables us to connect with the all in a way through which the imagination of our souls begin to change ourselves and the collective consciousness proportional to the level of work that we need to do in the real world. And what you two have exemplified today is that bridging of the worlds between matter and spirit, between the visible and the invisible realms. And so I really want to thank you. This has been extraordinary. This has been extraordinary.
Jim, deep gratitude. Thank you for your insight and wisdom and bringing it together. My goodness.
This is the work.
Same here.
This is the work.
Yes,
this is
it
the work. This
yes,
is the
it
work.
is.
So
We're
thank you,
in it.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you both. So that'll do it for us for today, everyone. And you're all welcome to the after session chat group. Mario or Maisa, if you could stay for a few minutes on the link that people that Stan will put in, we would appreciate it. But we know you're very busy people. And then on Monday, everyone, we're going to hear from those people who went to Chartres last month in a sacred pilgrimage. And we're also going to note the funeral of the Queen by listening to someone, Andrew Harvey, who met the Queen on a number of occasions and engaged in correspondence with her, and is going to talk about the archetype of Queen, which is one of the extraordinary archetypes. Maisa, you are a queen. You embody that archetypal formation. So what we saw with Elizabeth II is actually available to all of us in our own particular ways if we act with the kind of dignity with which she exercised for over 70 years on the throne as a living archetype of our time. So thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you back on Humanity Rising on Monday, same time, same station. Bye to you all, and Mario and Maisa. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.